What you call reality may not be the real world itself, but only a gentle, limited, and mysterious version of it that your brain is telling back to you. Welcome to Drift into Quiet Knowing. Tonight, we will step into a question that is scientific, mysterious, and deeply connected to everyday human life. Why might reality not be the same as what you see? You may be looking at the room around you, a familiar chair, soft light on the wall, darkness resting quietly in the corner, and feel that everything is clear, solid, and certain. But in truth, your eyes do not bring the entire world inside you. They only receive fragments of light signals. Your ears do not hear the whole universe. They only capture a very narrow range of sound. Your skin does not feel every invisible movement passing through the air. And then, somewhere in the warm darkness of the brain, those scattered signals are woven together into a world with shape, colour, sound, and meaning. The red colour of a flower does not truly sit inside the petals like a tiny object hidden there. It appears when light touches matter, reflects back into the eye, and is then interpreted by the brain as red. The sound of rain outside the window does not walk straight into the mind like a finished piece of music. Out there, it is only vibration moving through the air, but inside you it becomes a soothing sound, a memory, a feeling of peace, or sometimes a very quiet sadness that has no name. So if everything we see, hear, and feel has already passed through a silent layer of translation, the question begins to grow deeper. Are we living in the world as it truly is, or are we living inside a model created by the mind to help us understand, endure, and move through this life? In tonight's journey, you will understand why, at times, you can see something incorrectly and still believe it is right, remember something incorrectly and still feel that it is completely real, or sense something inaccurately and still be carried away by emotion. You will see that reality is not necessarily false, but it is far wider than the part our senses are able to bring back to us. And when we understand this, perhaps we become calmer, humbler, and gentler with ourselves and with others. By the end of this video, you may no longer see the world as a fixed painting, but as a mysterious river that your mind is quietly translating, second by second. For now, all you need to do is relax your body, let your shoulders soften, let your breathing slow down, and if possible, dim the light around you just a little. Let your mind step gently into this strange question. If reality is not completely the same as what we see, then what are we truly living inside? Let's begin with something that seems like one of the most certain things in our lives, our eyes. For many years, we believed that when we open our eyes, the world walks straight inside us. We see a table, a lamp, the face of someone we love, the green of leaves, the white of clouds, the soft golden light of the afternoon, and we often think we're making direct contact with reality. But if we slow down a little, very slowly, like a drop of water sliding down a window pane on a rainy night, we may realize that the eyes do not truly see the world in a complete sense. The eyes only receive light. They do not receive meaning. They do not receive names. They do not receive memories. They do not know whether the thing in front of them is a familiar chair, the bedroom door, or the hand of someone who once held our hand in days long gone. All of that is built afterward, in a quieter, darker, deeper place, the brain. When light from an object enters the eye, it passes through the cornea, through the lens, and then is focused onto the retina at the back of the eyeball. There, tiny cells that are sensitive to light receive the signals and turn them into electrical impulses. The strange thing is that from that moment on, the outside world no longer enters you as scenery. It becomes signals. It becomes bioelectrical activity. It becomes neural messages traveling along the optic nerve toward the brain. The glass of water on the table, the flower by the window, the bedside lamp, the face in the mirror, all of them, when they pass through the doorway of the eyes, are transformed into a very different language. No more glass of water. No more flower. No more face. Only signals remain. And then the brain, like a secret storyteller, quietly translates those signals into a world you can live inside. This does not make the world false. It only reminds us that what we're experiencing is not an untouched copy of the outside world. It is a construction, a translation, a model stable enough for us to walk, to love, to avoid danger, to find our way home, to read a line of text, to recognize a smile. The brain does not need to show us all of reality. It only needs to show us the part of reality that is necessary for survival. And right here, the mystery begins, not with some distant miracle, but with the most ordinary thing of all. When you open your eyes in the soft darkness of a room, you do not see everything that is there. You only see the part that the human nervous system can turn into experience. Imagine you are standing on a porch on a quiet evening. The air is cool. Far away there is a streetlight. You see a pool of yellow light falling onto the road, a few leaves trembling gently, the shadow of a tree stretching out like a thin streak of ink. The scene seems complete, but in truth, all around you, there are countless forms of electromagnetic waves that human eyes cannot see. There is infrared radiation from warm objects. There is ultraviolet light from the sun. There are radio waves passing through the walls of the house, through the air, through your body, without your eyes sensing them at all. There are signals that machines can detect, but to human vision, they are as if they never existed. Not because they are not real, only because our eyes do not have a doorway for them. Visible light is only a very small slice of the vast electromagnetic spectrum. Human beings often live inside that slice and call it the world. We say the sky is blue, the apple is red, the candle is yellow, the night is black. But those words are the language of the human nervous system, not the full language of the universe. A bee can perceive ultraviolet markings on flower petals that human eyes cannot see. Some snakes can detect infrared radiation from the bodies of their prey. An infrared camera can turn darkness into a heat map. A telescope can look at the universe through regions of light that the naked eye can never touch. So the same world can open into different versions depending on each living creature, each tool, each system of perception. What we call everyday reality is only reality cut to the size of human eyes. If that sounds distant, let's return to something very simple. A glass of water. Place it under yellow light in a quiet room, and it may look warm, soft, almost the colour of pale honey. Place it under the white light of morning, and it becomes clear, cooler, sharper, as if its nature has just changed. But the glass has not truly become another object. The water inside it has not gained a new memory. The glass has not just gone through some mysterious transformation. What has changed is the light touching it, reflecting back into your eyes, and the way the brain interprets that signal. The physical reality outside may be relatively stable, but your experience of it is as soft as mist, dependent on conditions, context, and the translating system within you. Colour is one of the most beautiful doorways into this secret. We often say a leaf is green, an orange is orange, a rose is red. But to speak with real precision, an object does not hold colour inside itself like a tiny jewel. An object absorbs part of the light and reflects part of the light. The eyes receive those reflected wavelengths. The cone cells in the retina respond in different ways. Then the brain compares, adjusts, balances, and creates the experience we call colour. Red is not only out there. Red is the meeting between light, matter, the eyes, and the brain. It is an event in perception. When you look at a red flower in the afternoon, you're not only looking at a flower. Light from the sun has travelled a long distance, touched the petals, lost part of itself, kept part of itself, and then sent a small sign into your eyes. From that sign, the brain creates red, and that red may bring along a memory, an old garden, a bouquet on a table, a farewell, a holiday, or something tender that has passed. Physics begins with wavelengths, but human experience does not stop at wavelengths. It blooms into emotion. And right there, the reality you live in is no longer just raw data. It is a world dyed with meaning. Maybe you have stepped into a room at dusk and seen a coat hanging on a chair that looked like a person sitting still. In the first half second, your heart tightened a little. Then you turned on the light and realized it was only fabric, only a sleeve, only a shadow. That moment is very small, but it reveals something big. The eyes send unclear signals and the brain quickly builds the most likely explanation. In dim light, outlines are vague. The brain does not wait for enough evidence, it guesses. And because the brain evolved to protect you, it would rather mistake a coat for a person than mistake a real danger for something harmless. The reality you saw in that half second was not the true outside world. It was the brain's prediction under low light conditions. The same thing happens more often than we think. A tree shadow outside the window can look like a hand. A cord on the path can briefly look like a snake. A face can appear in the pattern of curtains, in a crack in the wall, in the shape of drifting clouds. The human brain is especially good at finding patterns. It searches for faces, lines, and meaning. Because throughout the long history of human survival, quickly recognizing a face, a movement, or a sign of danger could be more important than looking slowly and accurately. So vision is not only recording, vision is interpretation, and interpretation can always be wrong. There is a small but very deep truth about the eyes. Each of your eyes has a blind spot. It is the place where the optic nerve leaves the retina, and in that area there are no cells that detect light. In terms of information, there is a real gap in the image the eye sends to the brain. But you do not move through life with a black hole floating in your field of vision. You do not see a strange empty patch on the face of the person across from you. You do not see a hole in the page of a book. Because the brain fills it in. It uses the surrounding information, the image from the other eye, and reasonable guesses to patch the missing place. And it does this so quietly that you usually do not know there was ever a gap there at all. Pause with that idea for a moment. There is an area in your field of vision that receives no data, and yet you still see the world as continuous. That means your visual experience is not made only of what the eyes actually receive. It is also made of what the brain adds so the world does not tear open. If the brain can fill in a small blind spot in the eye, then in the wider life we live, how many other gaps does it fill with memory, habit, fear, belief, and expectation? An unclear conversation, a facial expression whose meaning is uncertain, a silence in a text message, a passing glance. Perhaps many times, we are not living inside what happened, but inside the part the brain adds so the story feels complete. This is where science and mystery meet in a very quiet way. We do not need to imagine that the world is an illusion in a simple sense. Just by looking at the human visual system, we can already see that subjective reality has an unusually flexible structure. The brain is not a flat mirror. It is more like a deep lake. The reflection comes partly from the sky outside and partly from the condition of the water within. Visual illusions show this clearly. There are drawings that stay still but look as if they are moving. There are lines of equal length but one looks longer than the other. There are patches of colour that are exactly the same, but when placed on different backgrounds they seem to change colour. In those moments, we may know logically that the image has not changed, but the eyes and brain still create a different experience. This shows that I know and I see do not always line up. Sometimes knowledge stands on one side, while perception quietly continues along its old path. A very ordinary example is when we look at an asphalt road on a hot day and see what looks like shimmering water in the distance. We move closer and the water disappears. There was no pool of water there. Light was bent by layers of air at different temperatures, and the visual system interpreted that signal as a reflective surface, like water. That is not a deliberate deception. It is the sensory system working with what it receives. It offers its best hypothesis. Most of the time, that hypothesis is accurate enough for us to live. But accurate enough does not mean absolutely true. In the life of the mind, this is very important. Human beings often suffer not only because of what the eyes see, but because of the meaning the mind attaches to what the eyes see. You see someone turn away and think they are being cold. You see a silent room and think you have been abandoned. You see age appearing on the face in the mirror and think time is taking everything away. But between the image and the conclusion, there is always a very small gap. Inside that gap, the brain interprets. And if we can see that gap, even just a little, we can be carried away less easily. We can ask ourselves, what I am seeing, is it the signal, or is it the story the brain is creating from the signal? Let us return to the eyes on an ordinary evening. You turn down the lights, and the room becomes softer. The edges are no longer sharp, colours begin to fade. When there is less light, the rod cells in the retina become more active, helping us see in the dark, but they do not give us the rich colours we see during the day. That is why, in darkness, the world almost loses its colour. A red shirt can become a grey shape. A bright painting can retreat into silence. Just by changing the amount of light, perceived reality changes its voice. Perhaps that is why night always feels mysterious. Not only because darkness hides things, but because in darkness the brain has to take a larger role in completing the world. During the day, outlines are clear, colours are strong, and distance is easier to judge. At night, some of the data withdraws. The brain begins to rely more on memory, expectation, anxiety, and imagination. A familiar hallway can suddenly seem longer. The sound of wood contracting inside the house can resemble footsteps. A curtain moving slightly can look like someone has just passed by. The outside world does not need to change very much. With less information, the mind brings more of itself in. And here, we touch something deeply human. We are not weak when we sometimes see incorrectly. We are simply living through a limited system of perception. Our eyes are wonderful, but they are not all powerful. The brain is astonishing, but it is not a perfect recording machine. It filters, compresses, repairs, predicts, emphasizes, ignores, and then does all of that so quickly that we think we are seeing reality directly. Think of someone standing before the ocean at sunset. The sun sinks lower and the sea shifts into orange, purple, gold, then silvery grey. The ocean is not lighting those colours from within itself. Light passes through the atmosphere, reflects off the water, enters the eyes, and is then woven by the brain into the scene of a sunset. After that, the mind adds emotion, peace, longing, loneliness, gratitude. That scene is not only out there on the surface of the sea, it is also happening inside the person who is looking. The brain is always trying to preserve stability in a changing world. A white sheet of paper still looks white in sunlight. In the shade, we usually still recognize it as white, even though the light reflected from it has changed. The brain adjusts according to context so objects can appear consistent. This is very useful. Without that ability, the world would become chaotic, because every small change in lighting would make objects seem as if their nature had changed. But that very ability to stabilize also reminds us that the colors we see are not raw data. They are processed results. What appears in consciousness is an edited version made to have meaning. You could say that every time you look, the brain is silently asking, based on this signal, what is most likely out there? Visual experience is the brain's quick answer. Weak light makes the answer vague. An unfamiliar context makes the answer tense. Old memories color the answer with the past. The brain answers quickly because life does not wait for us to analyze every ray of light. But that very speed also creates subtle mistakes. From here, we can understand why the phrase, "I saw it with my own eyes," is both powerful and something we should hold with humility. Seeing something with our own eyes is an important kind of evidence in everyday life, but it does not mean we have touched the whole truth. A witness can miss details, light can mislead, an angle can hide something, expectations can guide attention. A moment that happens very quickly can later be rearranged by the brain into a story that is easier to understand. The eyes provide the ingredients, but consciousness receives a cooked meal, and that meal carries the touch of the chef, which is the brain. This does not make us lose faith in life. On the contrary, it can help us live more gently. When we know that we do not see everything, we are less quick to judge. When we know that colour, shape and movement all pass through the filter of the nervous system, we become less certain that the way we see things is the only way. Maybe in an argument, the other person is not deliberately wrong. They are simply living inside a different translation of the same event. Maybe we are too. Each person carries a pair of eyes, but behind those eyes is a personal history of nerves, emotions and memories. Look at this truth with a quiet mind. Reality does not disappear just because we do not see it completely. It is still there, vast and beyond the senses, but our experience of it is always a narrow doorway. Through that doorway a little light enters, and then the brain builds the sky, the room, the face, the road, the tree. From a stream of signals, it creates an entire world that seems continuous. That is both scientific and almost sacred, because this truth is so intricate, so quiet, and so beautiful. If you are listening to this in a quiet room, try to sense that the eyes, even when they are open, are only a small part of perception. There are countless things existing around you that the eyes cannot see. There are countless processes happening in the brain that you cannot hear. And in that silence, tonight's message becomes clearer. The reality you see is not the whole world, but the version of the world that the brain creates from signals, limits, and meaning. So the next time you look at a glass of water changing colour under a lamp, a coat shadow that briefly looks like a person in a dark room, a hot road shimmering as if there were water on it, or a red flower that makes your heart soften, remember that you're not just looking, you're taking part in a wondrous act of translation. The world sends you light. The eyes turn light into signals, the brain turns signals into images, the mind turns images into meaning, and from that meaning, you call it reality. But this doorway is only the first doorway, because if the eyes do not give us the whole truth, then what deeper things does the brain, the place that receives those signals, do next? Does it only sit and wait for the world to enter, or is it always quietly predicting, correcting, adding, and building a version of reality familiar enough so we do not get lost in the current of life? When we understand this, we begin to see that looking is not only receiving light. Looking is a very quiet negotiation between the outside world and the inner world, and within that negotiation, each person's personal reality begins to be born. If the eyes only receive signals, then what happens next is even stranger. The brain does not sit still like a video camera, waiting for the world to walk in. It is always doing something very quiet, very fast, and almost never with the permission of your conscious mind. It guesses. It predicts what is in front of you, what may be about to happen, what is safe, what is worth worrying about, what should be kept, and what can be ignored. Then, from those predictions, it builds a version of reality clear enough for you to move through life without sinking into chaos. So when you look at a room, hear a sound, or feel that someone's gaze means something, you're not only receiving the world, you're living in the meeting place between outside signals and an inner model. This begins with a very ordinary truth. The world never sends us perfect information. Light can be too weak, sound can blend into the wind, a face may appear for only a moment, a sentence may lack context, a human figure may be hidden behind the rain. If the brain had to wait for every piece of evidence before understanding, we would react too slowly. So the brain learns to use the past to guess the present. It uses what has happened before, familiar patterns, previous moments of being right and wrong, to move just a tiny step ahead of the world. Because of that, you do not need to analyze every line of a chair to know it is a place where you can sit. You do not need to relearn the face of someone you love every morning. You do not need to decode the sound of rain every time you hear it touching the roof. The brain already has a silent storehouse of predictions, and that storehouse makes reality feel continuous. Imagine you are walking through a familiar house at night. The lights are off, and only a thin layer of light remains from the window. You cannot see every object clearly, but you still know where the path is, where the table stands, and how far the wall is from you. You walk slowly, but you're not completely lost, because the brain is not relying only on the image of the present moment. It uses an old map of the house, the feeling of the body, the memory of distance, and the hundreds of times you have passed through that place before. The world in front of you is low on light, but the inner model helps you complete it. We do not only see with the eyes of the present, we also see with the memory of all the times we have lived. And that is why a familiar place can suddenly become strange when just one small detail changes. A chair has been moved somewhere else, a door that is usually closed is now slightly open, or a sound appears where there is usually silence. The brain immediately senses that something does not match its prediction. Before you can name the reason, the body already feels that the world has shifted slightly away from the familiar map. The outside world may send you only a small sound, but memory and fear may decide whether that sound becomes the night wind or an invisible figure. Imagine two people sitting in the same dark room. Outside, a tree branch touches the window glass. The first person has lived for many years in a house surrounded by trees and is used to the sound of leaves brushing across the window whenever the wind blows. That person hears the sound and thinks, it is only the wind. Their breathing remains slow and the body stays soft. But the second person has gone through an unsafe experience in the past. To them, that sound is not only a sound, it opens a memory. It calls back a feeling of alertness. The same branch, the same room, the same quiet night, but two different realities appear in two different nervous systems. That is why personal reality is not made only from outside signals. It is also made from inner history. A sound is never only a sound. It is heard through what the body has been through. A gaze is never only a gaze. It is understood through the times we have been loved, ignored, misunderstood, or comforted. A silent room can feel peaceful to one person, but lonely to another. That difference does not live entirely inside the room. It lives in the way the brain builds a model from what it knows, what it fears, and what it expects. One person looks at a grey cloud and thinks of gentle rain. Another person looks at that same cloud and feels a heavy day. The cloud is still there, but the mind never meets it like a blank sheet of paper. The mind always brings its own ink. From a scientific point of view, the brain is always solving an incomplete puzzle. The ears do not send the brain the sentence, "Someone is walking in the hallway." The ears only send sound vibrations. The eyes do not send the brain the sentence, "This is someone you love." The eyes only send light signals. The skin does not send the brain the sentence, "This is safety." The skin only sends temperature, pressure, vibration, and the feeling of contact. The brain has to infer the cause behind those signals. It relies on rhythm, volume, direction, context, memory, and habit, then creates a hypothesis. If that hypothesis matches the next signal, the brain keeps it. If it does not match, the brain adjusts. Maybe the footsteps turn out to be the heater turning on. Maybe the tapping turns out to be a branch touching the glass. Maybe the frightening thing is only something harmless that the brain understood too quickly in the dark. In everyday life, we rarely notice this process because it happens so quickly. You look at a cup and immediately know it is a cup. You hear the doorbell and immediately know someone has arrived. You see a facial expression and immediately guess the other person's emotion. But beneath that immediate feeling is a whole structure of complex processing. The brain compares the new signal with its old library of patterns. It makes a prediction. It checks for errors. It updates. Then it gives consciousness and experience that has already been neatly organized. This is a familiar object. This is a sound worth noticing. This is sadness. This is irritation. This is safe. This is something to avoid. We are like someone sitting in a movie theatre, seeing the story on the screen without seeing the projector running behind it. The projector is still there, and inside the brain, invisible layers of processing are still connecting scattered pieces into a world that seems solid. Try a smaller example. When you read a familiar sentence, sometimes you can miss a typo and still understand the meaning. The brain does not always read every word like a cold inspector. It predicts the next word based on context. If the sentence is familiar enough, it fills in the missing part. This helps us read faster, understand faster, and live faster in a world full of information. But that same ability can also make us skim past mistakes without noticing them. The brain loves coherence. It often prefers a reasonable story over a pile of unexplained scattered details. And this mechanism does not only happen with written words, it also happens in relationships. Someone replies more slowly than usual. The outside signal is only a delay, but the brain does not let it remain a blank fact. It begins to build meaning. Maybe that person is busy. Maybe that person no longer cares. Maybe I did something wrong. If, inside us, there are many old wounds around abandonment, the brain may lean toward the more painful hypothesis. The same silence on a screen may feel light to one person and freezing cold to another. The outside reality is a period of waiting. The inner reality may be an entire silent storm. This does not mean our emotions are wrong. Emotions always have a reason in the history of the body. But it reminds us that emotions are not always complete evidence of the outside world. Sometimes emotion is evidence of what the nervous system is predicting. Fear may signal that there is danger, but it may also signal that the brain has recognized a pattern once connected to danger in the past. Sadness may signal that we are losing something, but it may also be an old memory placing its color over a new event. So when we feel something very real, we can respect it and still gently ask, is this coming from the present, or from an old prediction coming alive inside me again? That question does not make the emotion disappear, but it opens a little breathing space between signal and reaction. One of the things that makes the brain astonishing is that it does not only predict the outside world, it also predicts the body itself. You walk down the stairs without looking at each step. The brain predicts where your foot will touch the ground. You reach for a glass of water without needing complicated calculations. The brain predicts the weight, the position, and the amount of force needed. When the prediction is right, movement flows so smoothly that we do not notice it. But if the glass is lighter or heavier than expected, the hand immediately pauses. A small mismatch appears, and the brain updates. Maybe you've taken one more step even though the staircase had already ended. Your foot drops lower than expected, the body jolts slightly and the heart briefly sinks. That moment is very ordinary, but it shows that the brain has already built a small reality for the body to follow. When the world does not match the inner model, we do not only know it in the mind, we feel it throughout the whole body. Because the brain is always predicting, surprise has great power. A sudden sound in silence startles us not only because it is loud, but because it breaks the quiet model the brain has just built. A message from someone who has not contacted us in a long time can make the heart beat differently, not only because of the words on the screen, but because it opens a chain of possibilities we were not prepared for. A familiar room that suddenly has a strange smell can make us stop because our prediction of that place has just shifted. The brain loves consistency, but mismatches force it to learn more about the world. If a safe mismatch repeats many times, the model can soften. A peaceful night can teach the brain that not every sound is dangerous. A kind conversation can teach the brain that not every disagreement leads to loss. Someone who stays can teach the brain that not every silence is a sign of being abandoned. This is where the message comes very close to daily life. If personal reality is a model, then we can learn to recognize that model, not to deny it, not to coldly say that every feeling is only imagination, but to create one small space of freedom. When we hear a sound at night, we can breathe slowly and ask, is there another hypothesis besides danger? When we see an expression we do not understand, we can ask ourselves, am I reading this through an old fear? When the world suddenly feels heavy, we can ask, is the mind using yesterday's colour to cover today? That space of freedom is very small, but it can change an entire night. We do not have to immediately believe the first story the mind tells, because the first story is often the fastest story, not necessarily the truest one. From a scientific perspective, there is an idea often called predictive processing. Put simply, the brain does not passively receive sensory signals. It continually creates predictions about the causes of those signals, then compares them with the information that actually enters. When there is a difference between the prediction and the signal, the brain uses that error to adjust the model. If the prediction is right, the world feels smooth. If the prediction is wrong, we startle, pay attention, and relearn. But what is beautiful, and a little mysterious, is that these predictions do not live only in laboratories. They are present in every ordinary moment. When you hear the voice of someone you love on the phone, you do not need to hear every full syllable before recognizing them. The brain has already predicted their speaking rhythm, tone, and pauses. When you walk down a familiar road, you do not need to see every detail before knowing where you are. The brain has already built the map before you can name it. When you step into a bakery and smell warm butter, the brain does not only receive the scent, it calls up memory, predicts sweetness, predicts warmth, and may make the body soften before you have eaten anything at all. So perception is not a mirror. It is more like a conversation. The world speaks through light, sound, scent, pressure, and temperature. The brain answers with prediction, memory, comparison, and adjustment. Your experience is where that conversation meets. If there were only the world and no brain, there would be no red as you know it, no sound of rain as you hear it, no feeling that this room is familiar. If there were only the brain and no world, the model could drift into dreams, imagination, and hallucination. Our living reality lies between two shores. The outside sends signals, and the inside creates meaning. When we are awake, sensory signals anchor the model to the outside world. When we sleep, that anchor loosens, and the mind can weave scenes from memory, emotion, worry, and desire. This shows just how powerful the brain is in building experience. If we look very slowly, we will see that this truth is both humbling and freeing. When we believe we are seeing the world exactly as it is, we easily cling to our first judgment. We easily say, everything is already clear. That person definitely thinks that way. This is definitely dangerous. This feeling is definitely the truth. But when we know the brain is a predictor, we can become softer. We can say, this is how my mind is understanding the situation right now. It may be partly right. It may be missing something. It may need more light, more time, more data, more calm. Part of being awake is not always seeing correctly right away. That is too difficult for a creature with a limited brain. Part of being awake is knowing that we are seeing through a model. When we understand this, we can live with others with deeper compassion. A person who reacts strongly to something we see as small may not be reacting only to that small event. They may be reacting to an inner model that has been built over many years. A silent person is not necessarily emotionless. Maybe their brain is overloaded, trying to predict what would be safe to say. An anxious person is not necessarily weak. Maybe their nervous system has learned that the world can change quickly and needs to be watched carefully. And with ourselves, we can also become gentler. You're not always hurting because of the present. Sometimes you are hurting because the brain is using the present as a doorway into an old memory. You are not always afraid because there is real danger. Sometimes you are afraid because the brain once learned to see uncertainty as danger. Understanding this does not erase emotion, but it places a small lamp beside it. In the silence of the night, this idea can become very gentle. Your brain has worked all day to keep the world stable. It has predicted paths, voices, facial expressions, meanings, and what may come next. It has tried to protect you with old maps. Sometimes it is right, sometimes it is wrong, sometimes it makes you tired, but deep down it is trying to help you survive in a world too vast to fully understand every second. Maybe we do not need to hate our predictions. We only need to learn not to be swallowed by them. And so, when we say that the brain builds a version of reality we can live in, we're not saying the world is unreal. We're saying the real world is wider than our model of it. That model is necessary, but it is still a model. It is like a map. A map helps us move through a city, but the map is not the city. On the map, there is no smell of morning bread, no cold feeling on the stair railing, no gaze from the flower cellar, no feeling of a street reminding us of our youth. The brain needs a map to find direction, but life is always larger than the map. Reality is always larger than what we have just understood about it. Now we can return to the original question. Why might reality not be the same as what we see? Because seeing is not only receiving data. Hearing is not only receiving sound. Feeling is not only making contact with the present. Everything passes through a brain that is predicting. That brain has been shaped by evolution, childhood, habit, memory, pain, love, and countless times the world has touched us. It does not record the world like an emotionless machine. It builds a version with meaning, priorities, emotion, and a purpose for survival. That version is a gift, because without it, life would be too chaotic. But that version is also a veil because it can make us confuse what we predict with what is actually happening. Peace may begin when we do not tear away that veil, and also do not blindly believe in it. We simply learn to see it as a layer of translation. The world is still there. The brain is still telling a story, and somewhere between those two things, your experience is quietly being born second by second, breath by breath, in each very soft rhythm of the night. Now, let us move a little deeper into a very small doorway that holds a strange power in your life: attention. If the eyes receive only part of the signal, and the brain builds a model from those signals, then attention is the gatekeeper standing in front of that model. It decides what is allowed to enter consciousness, what is pushed into the dark background, what becomes bright and clear as if it is right in front of you, and what still exists, but is almost absent from your private world. Every second, too many things are touching your body and your senses. There is the pressure of the chair against your back. There is the temperature of the air on your skin. There is the very faint sound of machinery somewhere in the distance. There is light reflecting from the wall, from the floor, from objects at the edge of your vision. There is your heartbeat, your breathing, the feeling of heaviness or lightness in your arms and legs. But you cannot live with all of those signals at the same time. If every sound rang out equally, if every sensation on your skin demanded the same amount of attention, if every detail in the room appeared equally bright and clear, the mind would quickly become overloaded. So the brain has to do something both wise and ruthless. It chooses. Attention chooses a few things and makes them rise into awareness. The rest do not disappear from the world, but they move into the background. They become the setting. We may still be able to hear the very soft ticking of a clock in the room, but if we do not pay attention, it is as if it is not there. We may still feel our shirt touching our skin, but after a few minutes that sensation fades. We may still see most of the scene around us, but if we are focused on reading one line of text, many other details drift by like mist. This may sound simple, but it leads to a very deep truth. You do not experience all of reality. You experience the part of reality that attention has allowed to enter. Imagine you're sitting in a quiet coffee shop in the afternoon. In that space, there is the sound of a cup being placed on a saucer, the sound of the espresso machine, the sound of the door opening, the sound of people speaking softly, the sound of traffic far away on the street, the smell of coffee, sunlight on the tabletop, and faces passing by. If you are waiting for someone you love, every time the doorbell rings, your mind immediately turns toward it. If you are reading an important letter, the noise around you fades. If someone at the next table suddenly says your name, that name can pull you out of every thought in a single second. The space itself does not change in each of those moments, but your reality changes because attention has just changed direction. That is why attention is not like a lamp that lights up the entire room. It is more like a narrow beam of light. Wherever that beam falls, that place becomes clearer. Wherever the beam leaves, that place sinks into the background. A phone lying on the table can be meaningless for an entire hour until you are waiting for an important message. Then, if the screen lights up even slightly, your whole body already knows. A sound in the house may not matter much during the day, but when you're lying alone at night, attention turns toward the darkness, and that sound may seem louder, closer, and more meaningful. The world does not always grow larger. Sometimes attention makes one part of the world grow larger inside you. There is a very familiar phenomenon. When you have just bought, or just started noticing, a blue car, suddenly it seems as if there are many blue cars on the road. Before that, they may have passed you every day. But because that blue colour had no special meaning, attention did not hold on to it. From the moment the mind marks it as important, the brain begins pulling it out from the background of the street. The outside world has not necessarily created hundreds of new cars. The lock on the doorway of your attention has changed. A piece of reality that once passed by quietly has now been invited into consciousness. This does not only happen with cars. When someone is hoping to have a child, they may notice baby strollers, children's clothes, and the sound of children laughing in the park more easily. When someone has just lost a loved one, they may see traces of absence everywhere. An empty chair, a teacup no one uses anymore, a song that happens to play in a store. When someone is worried about aging, they may pay more attention to wrinkles in the mirror, slower footsteps, and reminders of time. The world has not necessarily become more full of those things, but attention has made them brighter, heavier, and closer. And because what we pay attention to often feels more real, we can easily believe the world is changing in the exact direction the mind is searching for. This is very important for inner peace. What you pay attention to tends to grow inside your experience. If the mind keeps returning to danger all day, the world can begin to feel like a place that is always waiting to hurt you. If the mind keeps returning to your mistakes all day, you may begin to feel like nothing more than a collection of things that are not good enough. If attention is placed on the breath, on soft light on the wall, on the steady sound of rain, on the feeling of the body being supported by the bed, reality does not turn into heaven, but it may become a little less sharp. Attention does not create everything out of nothing, but it chooses which part of the world gets magnified in consciousness. The science of attention shows that the brain cannot process everything with the same priority. It has to allocate resources. It strengthens signals related to the current goal while weakening or ignoring signals that are less relevant. When you're looking for your keys on a table, the brain prioritizes small metallic shapes, reflections, and familiar locations. When you're listening to one voice in a crowded room, the brain tries to separate that voice from the surrounding background of sound. When you're driving, an unusual movement at the side of the road may pull your attention more strongly than a familiar sign you have seen hundreds of times. The brain does not filter because it hates the world. It filters because without filtering, you would drown. But every gift has its price. Because attention filters the world, it can also make us miss things that are very obvious. There are famous experiments on inattentional blindness, where viewers focus on counting basketball passes and may fail to notice a very unusual figure walking across the middle of the scene. What is worth reflecting on is not that their eyes are broken. Their eyes still receive light. The brain still has signals. But because the attention task is so narrow, the unexpected detail is not fully brought into consciousness. It is present in the scene, but but it is not truly present in the viewer's experienced world. This can make us shiver a little, in a very quiet way. Because if a large detail in a scene can be missed when we are too focused on a small task, then in everyday life, how many things have we missed simply because the mind was busy counting something else? We may miss the tiredness in the voice of someone we love because we're too focused on whether we are right or wrong. We may miss the beauty of a morning because we are lost in thoughts about something that has not happened yet. We may miss the body's signal that it needs rest because we are trying to finish one more thing. We may miss a small act of kindness in a day because attention is being pulled into a great sadness. Those things are not absent. They simply cannot pass through the narrow doorway. There is another phenomenon that is also very close to daily life: change blindness. Sometimes a scene in front of us changes in an obvious way, but if the change happens while we blink, turn our head, become distracted, or fail to place attention in the right spot, we may not notice it. Someone changes a scarf, an object is moved, a detail disappears, and the mind still thinks everything is continuing as before. This shows that consciousness does not keep a full copy of the world. It often keeps the parts needed for the current task, then trusts that the rest remains stable. We have the feeling that we see the whole room, but many times we are truly processing only a few important areas. The rest is a gentle belief that the world is continuing as we think it is. The same is true of inner life. We may know someone for a very long time and still notice only a few strong traits, a few habits, a few old memories. Their slow changes may pass through us like soft light in a room. Then one day they feel unfamiliar, not because they changed in one single moment, but because our attention missed many small movements along the way. Human reality is always changing, and our attention is not always wide enough to witness it. Attention has another power as well. It makes whatever we notice seem meaningful. When you hear an ordinary sound while you are afraid, attention clings to it and begins to ask, "What is that? Is it dangerous? Is it a sign of something?" A neutral sound placed under the light of alertness becomes heavier. In contrast, a similar sound on a peaceful morning may be only part of the background of the house. The wind is not just the wind when the mind is searching for a sign. A sentence is not just a sentence when the mind is waiting to be heard. Attention does not only make something clearer, it also invites emotion and meaning to follow. Look at an ordinary day. In the morning you wake up and notice a slight pain in your shoulder. If you have something joyful to do, meet someone you love, or hear a story that makes you laugh, that pain may move into the background. It still exists, but it does not take over the entire inner sky. But if you sit still and worry about your health, constantly checking the feeling in your shoulder, every small pulse of tension may become larger. This does not mean the pain is imaginary. It only shows that the experience of pain does not live only in irritated tissue. It also depends on attention, emotion, and the brain's interpretation. The body sends the signal, and attention decides whether that signal stands center stage or waits behind the curtain. This is why many calming practices, from slow breathing to mindful meditation, do not try to erase the outside world. They simply train the doorway of attention in a gentle way. When you place your attention on the breath, air coming in, air going out, the belly rising, the shoulders dropping, you're giving the brain a safe place to anchor itself. Thoughts may still come, but they do not necessarily have to take all the stage light. A worried thought can appear and then drift away. A memory can step in and then leave. A sound outside the door can be noticed without needing to become a story. In this way of seeing, attention is like a very soft hand. Where it rests, that place is felt more clearly. Where it lets go, that place holds less power. Some things are always there, quiet like stars in the daytime. Only when the mind turns toward them do they begin to enter your world. In the daytime, the stars do not disappear. They are only hidden from human eyes by the light of the sun. Life is the same. Gratitude, peace, tiredness, sadness, love, fear, and the beauty of small things can all exist at the same time. But whichever one receives attention may seem like the entire sky. A day can contain both difficulty and tenderness. If the mind looks only at the difficulty, that day becomes heavy. If the mind allows itself to notice one kind gesture, one comfortable breath, one ray of light on the wall, the difficulty does not disappear, but the day gains more depth. Reality is not turned into a fake shade of pink, it is simply seen with more layers. Still, we need to be careful not to turn attention into a form of blame. Not everyone who is suffering only needs to focus on the good for everything to become fine. The brain and body have their histories. Some pain needs to be listened to. Some circumstances are truly difficult. Some losses cannot be soothed by a gentle sentence. But even then, understanding attention has value. It tells us that present experience has many layers. One layer is the event. One layer is the body's signal. One layer is emotion. One layer is the story the mind is placing over all of it. And attention can help us recognize each layer instead of being swept into them as if they were one single mass. Imagine someone lying awake at night, unable to sleep. The room is quiet. Outside, the sound of a car fades into the distance. The person begins thinking about tomorrow, about unfinished tasks, about aging, about health, about something someone said that afternoon. The more attention goes into that stream of worry, the more branches it opens. One thought leads to another. But if that person gently brings attention back to the support of the body on the bed, to the slow rhythm of breathing, to the feeling of the blanket covering the legs, to the steady sound of the night, the inner world may change its brightness. Worry may still be there, but it no longer takes up the entire scene. Not because reality has disappeared, but because the doorway of attention is no longer opening only toward anxiety. From here, we can look back at conflicts with gentler eyes. Two people standing in the same room may not be living in the same psychological reality. One person pays attention to the loud tone and feels attacked. The other person pays attention to the content of the words and thinks they are only explaining. No one has the whole picture. Each person is living inside the part of reality that attention has pulled into consciousness. Just by pausing and asking, "What am I paying attention to?" the doorway of conversation can open more softly. Attention also explains why our memories are not exactly the same, even when we go through the same event. At a family dinner, one person remembers the food, another remembers one sentence, and someone else remembers a certain look in someone's eyes. Not because there were physically many different dinners, but because each mind paid attention to a different part. The parts that received attention went deeper into memory. The parts that were ignored dissolved into the background. Years later, each person sincerely believes their own version, because they are telling the piece of reality that attention preserved. This makes human truth complicated, but also very soft. We can learn not to rush into claiming that our version is everything. We can say, "This is what I saw, what I heard, what I paid attention to." There may be other parts I missed. That humility does not make us weaker. It brings us closer to the larger reality. It reminds us that the world does not fit entirely inside the small circle of personal attention. Beyond that circle, there are shadows, details not yet understood, other people's stories, and signals we have not yet opened ourselves to receive. And now, as we let all of this settle, we can feel attention as a very ordinary miracle. It helps you read one sentence among countless images. It helps you hear one voice in a crowd. It helps you find your keys on a table, recognize the sound of your name being called, feel a light breeze coming through the window, and return to the breath when the mind is too full. But it can also make you miss something obvious, magnify a fear, shrink a joy, or turn one small part of the day into the whole story. Attention is both the lamp and the veil. It illuminates, but it also hides. It brings reality into consciousness, but only one part at a time. Perhaps that is why the path toward being more awake is not trying to see everything at once. No one can do that. The gentler path is knowing that we are seeing through a narrow doorway, and from time to time we can gently turn that doorway. From fear to the breath, from judgment to curiosity, from a mistake to what can be learned, from another person's silence to the possibility that they may also be tired, from the feeling that we have understood everything to the truth that life always has more parts we have not yet seen. Each time the doorway turns like that, subjective reality changes shape a little. Not loudly, not magically in some strange, distant sense. It is simply the mind opening into a wider version of the same world. And if the eyes only receive signals, the brain only builds models, and attention only opens a very narrow doorway, then the question becomes deeper. How much are the memories, emotions, and beliefs quietly living inside you distorting reality? Because perhaps behind what you are seeing today there is not only light and sound. There are also the years that have passed. There are the stories you once believed. There are the wounds that once taught you to stay alert. There are the expectations that once made the world brighter or darker. And in that deepest place, reality is not only seen, it is remembered, felt, believed, and sometimes changed by the most invisible things inside the mind. Once attention has opened a very narrow doorway, what passes through that doorway is still not reality in its complete form. It moves through deeper layers we often do not see because they sit behind emotion, behind memory, behind beliefs that have lived with us for so long that we mistake them for the truth. One person can look at a room and feel peace. Another person can look at that same room and feel emptiness. One person can hear a short sentence and hear clarity. Another person can hear that same sentence and hear coldness. The outside world may send only a small signal, but inside each human being the past will ask, "What does this resemble that I have been through before?" Emotion will ask, "Is this safe?" Belief will ask, "Does this confirm what I have always thought about myself and about life?" And before we even realize it, a private reality has already been colored. We do not look at the world with empty eyes. No one steps into the present as a completely blank sheet of paper. We enter each moment with everything we have lived through, the words we have heard, the losses we have passed through, the things that once frightened us, once gave us hope, once made us believe the world is a place we can trust or a place we must watch carefully. So the present is never only the present. It is always being met by someone with a history. When you look at a closed door, you do not only see wood, hinges, and darkness behind it. You may see a lost opportunity, privacy, rejection, or simply a room at rest. The door does not speak all of those meanings on its own. The mind places them onto the door very quickly, very naturally, like laying a thin mist over the scene. Memory is one of the strongest layers of mist. We often think of memory as a film clip stored away somewhere, ready to be taken out and watched again when needed. But human memory does not work that simply. Every time we remember, the brain does not merely play back an old recording exactly as it was. It reconstructs the experience from many pieces: an image, a sound, a bodily feeling, a meaning, a story we have told about that event in the years afterward. Memory may keep the core of something, but it can also change, soften, sharpen, lose a detail, or gain a new emotion. It is like opening an old letter again and again, while the light of today falls across the paper in a different way each time. The letter is still the same letter, but the reader is no longer the person they were back then. Maybe you have remembered an old conversation and felt certain that the other person spoke in a very cold voice. But years later, if you listen to a recording of it, you might realize that the voice was more ordinary than you thought. What was cold may not have been the original sound, but your feeling at the time. A sentence landing in a sad mind is different from the same sentence landing in a peaceful mind. When we remember, we often remember our own emotion too, then mix it with the event. Over time, emotion can become the background colour of memory, and when that memory is brought back into the present, it continues to colour new things. Imagine someone who was repeatedly ignored when they needed to be heard. Years later, on an ordinary evening, they say something to someone they love, but the other person is tired and answers a little slowly. The outside event is very small, a delay, a distracted look, a response that is not quite warm enough. But in the brain, an old memory wakes up. Not as a clear film, but as a familiar feeling in the chest. I do not matter. I am being left behind again. At that moment, the present is no longer a separate moment. It becomes a doorway opening down into the deeper floor of the past. The other person may simply be tired, but the mind has already heard the echo of old days, and that echo changes the colour of reality. Sometimes reality does not hurt us immediately. It is the story the mind places on reality that makes it sharp. A text message contains only one word: okay. If someone is at peace, they may read it as simple agreement. If they are anxious, they may hear it as coldness. If they are afraid of being abandoned, that one word may feel like a door closing. The message has not changed. The letters have not changed. The screen has not changed. But inside 3 different inner states, 3 different worlds appear. A light world, a tense world, a sad world, and each world feels very real to the person living inside it. What is important is that the brain does not do this to deceive us. It does this because it is trying to predict. It uses what has happened before to read what is happening now. If, in the past, a short reply came with distance, the brain may learn that a short reply is a signal to stay alert. If silence once came with loss, the brain may treat silence as risk. If a serious expression once came with judgment, the brain may read a serious expression as a threat, even when the other person is only thinking. From the outside, that reaction may seem too intense, but inside the nervous system, it has its own logic. It is the logic of a brain that once learned how to protect itself. Emotion does the same thing. It does not only happen after we look at the world, it takes part in how we look. When we are sad, a room may seem darker even if the light has not changed. The road home may feel longer even if the distance is the same. An old song may feel heavier even if the melody has not changed. When we are at peace, that same room may become softer. That same road may feel like a way back home. That same song may be only a gentle wave of memory. Emotion does not change objects in a physical sense, but it changes the brightness, weight, and meaning of those objects in experience. There are days when you step outside and the grey sky seems sad, but the sky is not necessarily sad. It only has clouds, water vapour, scattered light, cold or humid air. The sadness appears in the meeting between the sky and your mood. Another person may look at that same sky and feel relief because they love rain, love quietness, love the feeling of the world slowing down. The same grey colour, two minds creating two meanings. This is why we do not only live in the weather outside, we also live in the climate within. There are sunny days when the human heart is still dark. There are rainy days outside when something inside becomes warm because of a tender memory. Fear makes reality narrower. When we are afraid, the brain gives priority to signs of danger. It hears unusual sounds more clearly, sees movements at the edge of vision more quickly, and reads changes on other people's faces more carefully. This is very useful when there is real danger, but if fear lasts too long, it can turn the world into a place crowded with threat signals. A closing door becomes a sign of anger. A silence becomes a sign of abandonment. A piece of feedback becomes proof that we are not good enough. A frightened mind does not only look at the world, it scans the world, like someone holding a lamp and searching for whatever might hurt them. And when we search for something long enough, we often begin to see it everywhere. Sadness makes reality heavier. When we are sad, the mind often selects evidence that fits the sadness. It remembers failures, losses, faces that have gone away. Good things may still appear, but they have a harder time entering deeply. A compliment may slide away like a drop of water on a leaf. A small mistake may sink in very quickly. Not because a sad person does not want to be happy, but because the emotional state is changing the doorway of reception. A sad mind is sometimes like a room with thick curtains. The light is still out there, but less of it gets in. And when less light gets in, it becomes easier to believe that the world has only darkness. In contrast, peace can make reality wider. When the body feels safe, the brain does not need to scan for danger as strongly as before. It can notice softer details, the warmth of a cup of tea, the steady breathing of a sleeping animal, the distant sound of the rain, the shape of a leaf touching the window glass, the tiredness in someone's voice. Peace does not make reality perfect. It simply allows us to see more than one layer. When fear is no longer pulling too hard, we can see that a person's silence does not necessarily mean distance. A difficult day does not necessarily mean a failed life. A mistake does not necessarily define who we are. In peace, the world still has sharp edges, but it is no longer made only of sharp edges. Belief is an even deeper layer. Memories may be pieces of the past. Emotions may be the present weather of the body, but beliefs are like glasses we have worn for so long that we forget we are wearing them. If someone deeply believes they are not worthy of love, they may interpret neutral events in ways that confirm that belief. Someone is busy and does not reply, and they think, "See, I do not matter." Someone compliments them, and they think, they are only being polite. Someone stays beside them, and they still worry. Eventually they will leave too. Belief does not need to shout. It only needs to stand behind the scene and quietly choose the meaning of everything that passes through. If someone believes the world is basically dangerous, they will live in a very different reality from someone who believes the world is difficult but still trustworthy. The same stranger smiles, and the first person may wonder, what do they want from me? The second person may see it as a moment of kindness. The same change at work appears, and the first person sees disaster coming, while the second sees a challenge that requires adaptation, not because one person is smarter than the other, but because belief is the pattern that shapes how the brain predicts. It tells the brain, look for evidence of this. And the brain, which is very good at finding patterns, often finds it. This is why human beings can sincerely live in different worlds while standing under the same sky. Someone who grew up with stability may see silence as normal. Someone who grew up with tension may see silence as the sign before a storm. Someone who is listened to may hear feedback as a chance to improve. Someone who is harshly criticized may hear the same feedback as a blow to their self-worth. The present event is like a seed falling into the soil, but every person's soil is different. There is soil made of trust. There is soil made of vigilance. There is soil made of hope. There is soil made of old pain. The seed may be the same, but the tree that grows is not the same. This makes relationships both beautiful and difficult. We often think we're reacting to the person in front of us, but many times we're reacting to a very old layer of meaning. Someone says, "It is up to you." To one person, that is empowerment. To another, it is indifference. Someone says, "I need time." To one person, that is a need for rest. To another, it is a signal that abandonment is coming. The words are the same, but history hears them differently. If we do not recognize this, we can easily believe the other person is deliberately hurting us. Sometimes that may be true, but sometimes they have only touched a string that has already been tense inside us for a very long time. Being awake does not mean denying that pain. No one should tell themselves they are not allowed to feel anything. Emotion is an important signal, but we can learn to sit beside emotion and ask, what is the outside reality and what is the inside story? Outside, there may be a short message. Inside, there may be fear of being abandoned. Outside, there may be someone who is tired. Inside, there may be a belief that we're always bothering other people. Outside, there may be a piece of feedback. Inside, there may be a memory of being criticized. When we gently separate those two layers, we do not make the emotion disappear, but we become less controlled by it as if it were the whole truth. There is a very small example that many people may recognize. You send a sincere message and wait for a reply. 1 minute passes, 10 minutes, 1 hour. The screen stays silent. If it is a peaceful day inside you, you may think the person is busy. But if you're feeling fragile inside, the silence begins to speak. It says you're not a priority. It says you said something wrong. It says something is beginning to crack. The outside reality is only that there has not been a reply yet, but the brain does not like empty space. It fills the empty space with prediction, and that prediction is often taken from the strongest memory, not from the most complete truth. Then, when the other person finally replies, "Sorry, I was driving," we may realize that an entire heavy story had been built from a very ordinary silence. When we see it this way, we can have more compassion for ourselves. The mind does not create stories to torture us. It is trying to make the unclear understandable. It is trying to prepare us in advance so we are not caught off guard. But if old models are too painful, they can turn the present into a narrow place. A person who was betrayed may see signs of betrayal in many places. A person who was looked down on may hear contempt in careless sentences. A person who once had to hold themselves together alone may find it hard to believe that someone truly wants to help. The mind is using an old map to move through new land. That map once helped us survive, but it may no longer help us live peacefully. So one of the gentlest things a human being can do is update the inner map, not in one night, not by forcing ourselves to be optimistic, but through small, repeated experiences that are safe enough for the brain to learn again. Someone who once feared silence can slowly learn that silence can also mean rest. Someone who once feared feedback can slowly learn that feedback can also come with respect. Someone who once believed they were not worthy of love can slowly learn through small actions that they do not have to be perfect in order to be allowed to stay. Each time the present does not follow the old script, the brain has a chance to revise one line in its model of reality. The mystery of the mind is that it does not only contain the past, it can also change the way the past lives inside us. A memory can be recalled with pain, but it can also be revisited with new understanding. An event that once served as evidence that we were weak can slowly become evidence that we survived something very hard. A chapter of life that once held only shame can gradually gain compassion too. Not because the old event disappears, but because the meaning around it changes. And when meaning changes, the present changes too. A person no longer sees every mistake as a sign that they are broken. They can see mistakes as traces of a human being who is learning. The outside reality may look the same, but the inner world has become less dark. Perhaps this is one reason contemplative traditions often remind people to observe the mind. Not to escape life, but to see clearly how life is being coloured by the mind. When a thought appears, we can ask, is this the truth, or is this an old belief? When an emotion rises, we can ask, what is it trying to protect me from? When a memory returns, we can ask, am I remembering the event, or am I remembering the story that has been told again and again about that event? These questions are not loud. They are like lighting a small candle in an old room. They do not erase the darkness immediately, but they help us see that the objects are not as frightening as they seemed when they were only vague shapes. If you have ever changed how you feel about a place, you will understand this. There may be a road that once made you sad because it was connected to a goodbye. Years later, you pass that road on a different morning, with a different person, in a different inner state, and suddenly it no longer feels as sharp as before. The trees are still there. The sidewalk is still there. The street corner is still there. But reality has changed colour, because memory no longer has full control over the interpretation. A new layer of meaning has been placed over it. It does not erase the old layer, but sets another light beside it. Human beings do not heal by erasing everything that happened, but by allowing reality to hold more than one meaning. Sometimes a scent can change the colour of the whole world. The smell of baked bread can carry someone back to the kitchen of childhood. The smell of antiseptic can remind someone else of a hospital. The smell of rain on dry earth can bring peace to one person, but remind another person of a season of loss. Scent moves very close to memory and emotion, sometimes faster than language. Just a passing smell can open an entire inner room. The physical world sends only a tiny scent molecule, but the mind receives it with a vast storehouse of history. That is how invisible things change the visible things in lived experience. Belief about the self may be the deepest layer of colour. If you believe you always fail, a small stumble can become the final proof. If you believe you can learn, that same stumble can become data. If you believe you are a burden, someone needing rest can make you feel rejected. If you believe you have value, you may understand that the other person needs space without turning it into a sentence against yourself. The difference does not lie in the first event. It lies in the background story you've been living with. And that background story, no matter how strong it is, can still be examined again. We do not choose every memory. We do not choose every first emotion. We do not choose all the beliefs that were planted in us when we were small, but we can gradually choose how we observe them. That is a very quiet freedom. When a thought says, "No one cares," we do not need to argue with it right away, and we do not need to believe it right away either. We can ask, is this thought coming from evidence in the present or from an old wound? When a feeling says, something is wrong, we can breathe and ask, what is the body trying to protect me from? When a belief says, I am not good enough, we can place another sentence beside it. Maybe this is an old model, not the whole truth? Questions like these are very small, but every time we ask them, we create a little distance between ourselves and the colour being laid over reality. That distance is where peace can begin. Not peace because everything outside has become perfect, but peace because we are no longer completely identified with the mind's first interpretation. We can see a short message and not immediately call it coldness. We can hear an unpleasant sentence and not immediately turn it into proof that we are not loved. We can feel a heavy day and not immediately conclude that all of life is dark. We can let reality be checked more carefully, seen from more angles, opened more slowly. One of the deepest things a human being can learn is this: a feeling can be very real, but it does not always tell the whole truth. And when night falls, when the outside world becomes quieter, the inner layers are easier to hear. Old memories may pass through like tree shadows moving across the ceiling. Unspoken emotions may rise when they are no longer covered by the noise of the day. Beliefs about the self may whisper in the darkness. If they appear, perhaps we do not need to be afraid. We can see them as layers of colour the mind has used to protect, explain, and survive. We can thank them for once trying to help us. then gently ask whether the present still needs to be seen through that colour. Maybe the answer will not come right away. But as soon as the question is asked, reality has already begun to gain more space. After all, reality is not only created from light entering the eyes, sound entering the ears, or attention choosing one part of the world. It is also woven from memory, emotion, and belief. A sky can be a sign of loneliness or peace. A sentence can be agreement or distance. A silence can be rest or abandonment. A room can be shelter or emptiness. The outside world offers the first shape, but the mind gives it the final colour. And if we understand that, we can become slower with our conclusions. Slower when judging others. Slower when condemning ourselves. Slower when believing that the most painful story is the truest story. Maybe maturity is not seeing a reality with no colour at all. For human beings, that may not exist. Maybe maturity is knowing what colour we are looking through. Today, the colour is sadness. Today, the colour is fear. Today, the colour is hope. Today, the colour is memory. When we know the colour covering our eyes, we are no longer completely deceived by it. We still feel it, but we also see beyond it. And in that wider seeing, reality becomes softer. Not because it loses its truth, but because it is returned to its deeper nature, a continuous meeting between the outside world and the inner mind, between what is happening and what we have lived through, between the light of the present and the long shadows of the past. And if memory, emotion, and belief can change the colour of reality this much, then the next question becomes even stranger. Even our sense of time, our sense of self, and our sense of a stable world around us, are they really as solid as we think? Or is time also soft inside the mind? Is the self also built day by day? And do our dreams each night quietly prove that the brain can create a reality real enough for us to tremble, love, cry, smile, and only when we wake up realize that we have just lived inside a world woven from within? If memories, emotions, and beliefs can change the colour of reality, then there is another layer that is even softer, even deeper, and even stranger. Our sense of time, our sense of self, and the worlds we step into each night when we sleep. These are things we usually see as very certain. We think 1 minute is 1 minute, 1 hour is 1 hour. We think we are the same person from yesterday to today. We think that only when we are awake, with our eyes open, touching objects, walking on the ground, are we living in reality. But when we look more slowly, we begin to realize that the mind does not experience time like a clock. It does not experience the self like a fixed stone. And in dreams, it can create an entire world real enough to make the heart race, tears fall, and the body feel fear, even though when we wake up we know that city, that person, that danger never existed outside the mind. Perhaps everyone has felt that 1 hour can feel as long as an entire afternoon, and an afternoon can disappear in the blink of an eye. When we sit waiting in a clinic, watching the clock hand slowly pass each mark, every minute can stretch out. When we lie awake at night, listening to the silence of the house, time can become thick like honey. But when we're talking with someone we love, reading a book that pulls us in, or doing something that fully absorbs the mind, 2 hours can pass so lightly that we are startled. The clock outside remains steady, but the clock inside is not steady in the same way. It contracts, expands, slows down, speeds up, depending on attention, emotion, the body, and the meaning of the moment. This shows that the time we live in is not only physical time. Physical time can be measured by clocks, by the movement of the second hand, by the rotation of the earth, by the extremely precise oscillations of atoms in modern measuring devices. But psychological time is something else. It is the way time is felt from the inside. When we are bored, the mind has more empty space to notice time passing. We pay attention to waiting, to the lack of change, to each silence between events, so time seems longer. When we are deeply focused, the mind merges with the action. We no longer stand outside it, watching each minute. We become the thing we are doing. Then time can fold inward like a piece of cloth being neatly folded away, not because the universe has changed speed, but because consciousness is no longer measuring time in the same way. Imagine someone sitting in a train station late at night. The train is delayed. White light falls onto the cold tile floor. A speaker occasionally gives a few announcements. The person looks at the clock. 10 minutes pass, but it feels like 30. Inside them, there is an important meeting, a worry, something they have not had time to say. Waiting makes every sound sharper. The sound of suitcase wheels in the distance, the creak of a chair, the footsteps of strangers, all of it seems to pull time into thin threads. But that same person, on another day, sits by a window reading a book they love. Outside, rain is falling softly. Each page opens into a new thought. When they finally look up, the sky has grown darker. An hour has disappeared like a breath. In both cases, the clock may be equally honest. But the reality inside is not the same. Here, we see something very important. The brain does not only build the image of the world, it also builds the rhythm of the world. It does not only tell us what objects are in front of us, it also makes us feel whether things are moving quickly or slowly, whether they are heavy or light, urgent or peaceful. When we're afraid, a few seconds can stretch in a strange way. When something unexpected happens, a moment can seem to open wider because the brain is paying stronger attention, recording more details, trying to quickly understand what is happening. When we are happy, time can fly. When we're waiting in anxiety, time can crawl. So the reality of time that we live in is not only a river flowing out there, it is also a river flowing through the inner state. Some people remember an accident and say everything seemed to slow down. They saw tiny details: light on the glass, the sound of brakes, a hand tightening, an object falling. Time may not have actually slowed down. It may be that, in a moment of stress, the brain increased attention and recorded more information, making the memory of that moment seem longer when looking back. This is another example showing that experience is not only what happens, it is also the way the brain records and retells what happens. 1 second outside can leave a long streak inside. 1 quiet year can pass through memory like a thin sheet of paper. Time in the mind is not made from numbers alone. It is made from attention, emotion, change, and meaning. And then there is a very special state that many people have tasted, even if they do not always name it. The state of being so deeply absorbed in something that the self fades, time changes shape, and action seems to flow on its own. A person playing music may forget the room. A person gardening may forget the afternoon. A person drawing, writing, fixing an object, cooking a meal, or walking through the forest may feel that they no longer have to force every small movement. Attention is not scattered in many directions. It gathers together, quiet and bright. In that state, time no longer stands in front of us as something that must be watched. It passes behind us, silent like wind. Only when we return do we realize that part of the day has already left us. Those moments show that the feeling of I am here in this time is not always equally solid. Sometimes the self is very clear, especially when we are anxious, ashamed, judged, or watching ourselves too much. Sometimes the self softens when we merge with what we are doing, with music, with nature, with the breath. We do not disappear, but the feeling of ourselves no longer takes the center so strongly. This is very strange if we think carefully. The self, that familiar sense that I am me, can brighten or fade depending on the state of the brain and body. It is not a motionless stone. It is more like a small flame continuously maintained by memory, bodily sensation, a name, habits, roles, the story of one's life, and the stream of consciousness linking this moment to the next. Each morning when you wake up, you usually know who you are without needing to reread a book about your life. You know your name, know the room, know that this body is yours, know that yesterday you lived through something, know that certain people belong to your life. But that feeling of continuity is not as simple as it seems. It is maintained by memory, by the inner sensations of the body, by the image of the body in space, by very small habits. The way your hand reaches for your phone, the way you recognize your own voice in your head, the way you remember something left unfinished, the way you feel that this is your hand, your breath, your life. Each piece is like a thread. When many threads are woven together, we feel a continuous self, but that self also changes day by day. The version of you from 10 years ago may have the same name, some of the same memories, and a body that continues from then until now. But your beliefs may be different, your fears may be different, the things you love may be different, and the way you see life may be different. You once thought you could not survive a certain loss, and later you did. You once believed something would last forever, and one day it changed meaning. You once hated a part of yourself, and many years later, learned how to love it. So who is the real you? The person from long ago, the person of today, or the continuous stream connecting all those versions? Perhaps the self is not a fixed point, but a story being retold, revised, remembered, forgotten, and then continued through the breath of the present. This does not make the self false, it makes the self alive. A river is still a river even though the water in it is always flowing. A flame is still a flame even though each bit of fuel burns and disappears. The feeling of I am me is like that. It has continuity, but it is not frozen. It is real in experience, but it is maintained by many flexible processes. When we understand this, we may become less afraid of change. Change does not necessarily mean losing yourself. Maybe it is the way the self continues to be written under new conditions. A person who has lived through pain does not return as exactly the same person they once were, but they do not disappear either. They become another version within the same river, and then, when night comes, dreams open the strangest proof of the mind's ability to create reality. In a dream, you can move through a city that has never existed on any map. The streets can feel both familiar and strange. A house can be your childhood home and, at the same time, a place you have never entered. You can meet someone who has never existed, yet in the dream, feel as if you have known them your entire life. You can run from a danger that is not real, but your heart still races. You can hear a sentence that was never spoken, but when you wake up, it still leaves an emotion in your chest. A dream is a gentle reminder that the mind does not only look at the world, sometimes it can weave an entire world real enough for us to believe in. The strangest thing is that while we are dreaming, we usually do not ask, does this make sense? We can walk from a kitchen onto a beach, from the beach into an old school, from the school into the night sky, and still accept that change of scene as normal. Someone who has passed away can appear, and we speak to them as if time has never separated us. A room can become a road. A door can open into a place that could not possibly be there. But in dreams, the mind does not need all the rules of waking life. It only needs enough emotion, enough connection, enough story flow for us to remain in that world. We do not need physical evidence. The experience itself is convincing. When we wake up, we often say, "It was only a dream." But the word "only" can sometimes be too small to hold what happened inside. If we were afraid in the dream, that fear was real in that moment. If we cried in the dream, the body may truly have reacted. If we met someone who has passed away, the tenderness or heartbreak after waking may last the whole morning. The dream world is not physical reality outside us, but it is experiential reality while it is happening. It does not need to exist outside the brain in order to soften the heart. It proves that the brain can create space, characters, events, emotions, and meaning from within, then let consciousness step into them, as if stepping into a real room. Imagine someone dreaming that they are standing on a bridge in the mist. Beneath them is dark water. At the end of the bridge, someone is waiting, but the face is unclear. That person calls their name in a voice both familiar and distant. In the dream, it lasts only a few seconds, but it feels like an important meeting. When they wake up, the room is still quiet. There is no bridge, no water, no person waiting. But the emotion remains. A vague longing, a wordless question, a feeling of having touched a deeper part of oneself. The brain built the scene, but the scene still left a trace. This shows that the mind does not only reflect daytime life, it also rearranges memories, emotions, desires, and fears into images with a life of their own. In dreams, time also becomes strange. Sometimes we feel we have lived through many days inside one story, but when we wake up, only a few minutes or a few dozen minutes have passed. Sometimes a short scene carries the depth of many years. Dreams do not respect time in the same way a clock respects it. They respect the logic of emotion. A goodbye in a dream can stretch out because sadness needs space. A chase can become fast and breathless because fear needs a quick rhythm. A reunion can stand still like a painting because the mind wants to hold that moment. In dreams, time is no longer a stable straight line. It is soft material for the mind to shape. The self in dreams is also not completely the same as the self when we are awake. Sometimes you are yourself as usual. Sometimes you're both the observer and the person inside the story. Sometimes you know you are dreaming, but emotion still carries you away. Sometimes you do things that are different from your waking self, accept impossible events, and believe dream memories that are not real. A dream city can come with the feeling that you have lived there for years, even though when you wake up you cannot find it in any part of your life. This shows that the sense of self is not only a fixed name, it depends on the state of consciousness, the memories that are active, the emotions that are present, and the way the brain organizes the story in that moment. Perhaps in waking life, we are not as far from dreams as we think. Of course, when we are awake, we're anchored to the outside world by more stable senses. We can check an object by looking at it, touching it, asking someone else, coming back an hour later and seeing that it is still there. But even when we are awake, the brain still builds a model. It still selects signals, predicts, fills in, assigns meaning, and colors things with memory and emotion. Dreams simply reveal that power more clearly because in dreams, the sensory anchor to the outside world becomes loose. When that anchor loosens, the mind shows us that it can create its own stage, bring in its own characters, write its own dialogue, create fear by itself, and make us believe. So when we say that reality inside the mind is softer than we think, we are not saying that waking life is exactly the same as a dream. We are only saying that both show human experience as a construction. When we are awake, that construction is strongly constrained by the outside world. When we dream, that construction is freer, drifting more into memory and emotion. But in both cases, consciousness does not contact reality like a perfectly transparent sheet of glass. It lives inside a version created by the brain, a version that may be accurate enough for us to move through the day, but still not the full depth of the world. Perhaps dreams also make us more humble before our own certainty. In dreams, we have believed things that were very irrational. We have feared something that was not real. We have felt joy because of a meeting that never happened. We have felt heartbreak because of a story that did not belong to the physical world. When we wake up, we smile and say, "I truly believed it then." But if we can believe so strongly in a dream, then while awake, how many times are we also believing in an incomplete version? How many times does an old fear make us believe the present is more dangerous than it really is? How many times does a belief about ourselves make us see a neutral event as a judgment? Dreams do not make waking life meaningless. They simply remind us that the feeling of very real does not always guarantee that we have seen the whole truth. Time is the same way. The feeling that a period of life is too long, too short, too late, or too early is often not only about numbers. An older person may look back at youth like a room that is both far away and close. Some years feel long while we are living through them, but when remembered, only a few images remain. Some moments are very short, but because they carry so much emotion, they stay bright in memory for decades. A hand held in a hospital. A morning when important news arrived. The first time seeing the ocean after many years. A sentence that changed you. The clock measures those moments in seconds and minutes, but the mind measures them in meaning. And meaning does not obey the size of the clock. This can bring a very great gentleness. If inner time can stretch and contract, we do not always have to believe the feeling that a sleepless night will last forever, that a sadness will never pass, or that a difficult season is the whole of life. When we are in pain, time often seems to stand still. But many times in life, what once seemed impossible to get through did pass, not because it was small, but because the stream of consciousness kept moving. One day, what fills the whole sky today may become a cloud in memory. Not gone completely, but no longer covering all the light. The sense of self can also bring comfort. You're not permanently trapped inside the current version of yourself. If the self is maintained by memory, body, habits, and story, then when memory is understood differently, when the body learns a safer feeling, when habits slowly change, when the story about yourself softens, the self can also turn in a new direction. Someone who once said, "I am a person who is always afraid," may gradually say, "I am a person who used to be very afraid, and I am learning to feel safer." Someone who once said, "I lost everything," may gradually say, "I lost something very important, and I am still alive." The change in the story is not pretending. It is the way the mind reorganizes inner reality. Perhaps this is the point where science and spiritual depth can stand quietly beside each other. Science shows us that the brain creates experiences of time, self, and dreams through complex processes. Contemplation reminds us not to cling too tightly to every passing state. An emotion can feel very real, but it moves. A dream can feel very real, but it dissolves. A version of the self can feel very familiar, but it still changes. A season of life can seem endless, but it too belongs to the flow. When we understand this, we can hold reality more lightly in the heart. Not deny it, not run away from it. Just not turn every temporary feeling into an eternal truth. Think of the moment you wake up after a powerful dream. For the first few seconds, you may still be between two worlds. The real room appears slowly. The walls, the ceiling, the light, the blanket, the breath. But the emotion of the dream is still there, like the scent of a place you can no longer see. Then, little by little, the brain updates. I am here, in this room, on this day. The dream world withdraws, the waking world returns. But that in-between moment is precious. It shows that reality can shift layers. Consciousness can move from one model to another. And what we call now is also reassembled by the brain each time we wake up. Some mornings, after dreaming about someone we have not seen in a long time, the whole day seems to carry the colour of that dream. You move through ordinary tasks, but inside another small current is flowing. One part of you is in the present, and another part is listening to the echo of last night's world. This shows that the border between dreaming and waking does not always close completely the moment we open our eyes. Emotion can cross that border. Dream memory can affect mood. An image that was not real outside can still influence the way you live through the day. The mind is like that. It does not only react to what is present, but also to what it has created, what it remembers, what it imagines, what it fears, and what it longs for. From here, we can return to the one message of this entire journey. The reality you experience is not an untouched copy of the outside world. It is a model built by the brain from signals, predictions, attention, memory, emotion, belief, the sense of time, the sense of self, and even dreams. That model is not meaningless. It helps you live, love, learn, avoid danger, find your way, remember the people you love, and recognize yourself in the mirror. But that model is softer, more flexible, and more easily colored than we think. A minute can stretch. A memory can change meaning. A dream can make the heart truly ache. A self can grow through new stories. An inner world can become strong enough to make the outside world look different. And if this leaves you feeling a little wistful, let that wistfulness be gentle. There is no need to panic because reality is not completely certain. Perhaps that uncertainty is also a space where we can breathe. If the mind can make fear larger, it can also learn to make peace clearer. If memory can make a place painful, new memories can also make that place less sharp. If time can stretch in boredom, it can also soften in presence. If dreams can create a world we believe in, then wakefulness can also help us recognize which stories are being created inside us, not to destroy everything, but to choose to live more awake, more spacious, and more kind toward ourselves. Now, after moving through the eyes, the brain, attention, memory, emotion, belief, time, the self, and dreams, the final question waiting ahead becomes wider. If everything we experience passes through these layers of translation, then are science and mystery truly opposites? Or are they meeting at a very quiet point? Reality is always larger than the part we can sense, and human beings are only living inside a small, beautiful, fragile, meaningful slice of a world far deeper than we know. And now, after we have moved through the eyes, the brain, attention, memory, emotion, belief, time, the self, and dreams, perhaps the deepest question is no longer, is reality real? The gentler, wider, and more humble question is this: is the part of reality we are perceiving the whole of it? Perhaps the answer lies in the very limits of being human. We do not need to believe that the world is fake. We only need to realize that the world is far larger than what the eyes see, the ears hear, the hands touch, and the mind interprets. Reality does not disappear behind the veil of perception. It is still there, vast, deep, and quiet. but we are only living inside a small slice, a small translation, a narrow pool of light that the body and brain allow to enter consciousness. Science does not necessarily take mystery away. Sometimes science makes mystery even deeper, because it shows us that the most ordinary things are not simple at all. A ray of light entering the eye is not just light. It is a very small part of the electromagnetic spectrum, while all around us there are radio waves, infrared radiation, ultraviolet light, X-rays, gamma rays, and many other forms of radiation that human eyes cannot directly see. A sound entering the ear is not just noise, it is a pressure wave in the air, transformed by the ear into neural signals so the brain can create the experience of hearing. A table in front of you is not just a solid object. At a smaller level, it is a network of atoms, electrons, bonds, interacting forces, and microscopic structures that ordinary senses cannot touch in the same way we touch the wooden surface. The closer we look, the more what once seemed certain opens into deeper layers. Imagine standing beside the ocean at night. In front of you is the dark surface of the water, a few silver streaks trembling softly under the moonlight, the steady sound of waves like the breathing of a giant living being. Your eyes see the surface, your ears hear the water, your skin feels the cold wind. But beneath that surface there are ocean currents moving, creatures that never rise, regions of immense pressure, layers of water with no light, sounds from very far away, and silent movements that a human being standing on the shore cannot know through direct senses. You do not see them, but they are still real. The ocean does not become smaller just because human eyes can only see the surface. Reality is the same. What we see may only be the surface of a greater depth. This brings us back to the entire journey so far. The eyes do not see the whole spectrum of light. The ears do not hear the whole world of sound. The brain does not record the world like a neutral camera, but builds a model from signals and predictions. Attention opens only a narrow door. Memories, emotions, and beliefs change the color of reality. Time inside the mind can stretch and contract. The self is maintained like a continuous story. Dreams can create a world real enough for us to cry, fear, love, and believe in it for that moment. None of this denies reality. It only reminds us that our experience of reality is always a version that has been filtered, built, colored, and retold in the language of the human nervous system. Perhaps being awake does not mean seeing everything. Perhaps it means remembering that what we are seeing has never been everything. That sentence sounds simple, but if we let it settle deeply, it can soften a great deal of suffering. When we believe we have seen the whole picture, we easily rush to conclusions. Someone is silent, and we conclude they are cold. A tiring day arrives, and we conclude our life is going downhill. One mistake happens, and we conclude we are not good enough. A strong emotion appears, and we conclude it is the final truth. But if we remember that what we see is only a part, we can slow down. We can ask more. We can breathe. We can allow reality to have more layers than the first story the mind places on it. Even matter, the thing we imagine to be the most certain, is not as simple as the hand feels it to be. When you place your hand on a tabletop, you feel solidity. That feeling is very real to the body. But at the atomic level, matter is not a solid block like tightly packed clay. It is made of atoms with inner structure, with a tiny nucleus and electrons existing in regions of probability around that nucleus. The solidity we feel is not because objects are absolutely solid blocks, but because electromagnetic forces and quantum rules prevent atoms from easily overlapping with one another. Your hand does not pass through the table, not because matter is as simple as it appears, but because an entire invisible order is helping the world keep its shape. This is beautiful if we look at it with a quiet mind. The table where you place your hand is not only a table, it is a kind of stability created by countless small interactions. Your body is the same. A hand may seem seamless, but it is made of cells, molecules, atoms, forces, and energy. We live in a world where certainty is often the result of things the naked eye cannot see. We walk on the ground, touch objects, hold someone we love, lift a cup of tea, and all of it seems simple. But behind that simplicity, a microscopic universe is operating with such precision that we rarely have to think about it. The ordinary nature of life is a miracle repeated so often that we forget to be amazed. When science says that human eyes can see only a small part of the electromagnetic spectrum, that does not make the sky less beautiful, it makes the sky wider. When science says that sound is vibration transformed by the nervous system into the experience of hearing, that does not take the poetry out of rain. It makes the sound of rain a strange meeting between the physical world and the brain. When science says that matter has atomic and quantum structure, that does not make a glass of water lifeless. It makes the glass part of a deeper order, where force, distance, energy, and shape hold a temporary stillness together. Science does not need to take mystery away. Science only changes where we find mystery, not in denying the world, but in looking at the world so closely that it opens into unexpected layers. We can return to a very familiar example. During the day, you walk through a room and see ordinary things: a chair, a table, a window, curtains, light. Everything seems complete. But with an infrared camera, that same room could appear as a heat map. Warm objects would glow in a way ordinary eyes cannot see. With a device that detects radio waves, the room would no longer seem as quiet as you thought, because communication signals are passing through the air. With a microscope, the smooth surface of the table would become rough and complex. With tools that detect bacteria, a tiny living world would appear on places that seem clean. The same room, but each tool opens a different version. This does not mean there are many completely separate worlds. It means reality has many layers, and human senses enter only a few of them. And if even a small room contains that many layers, then how deep must the vast universe be? To the naked eye, night looks like a black cloth with a few bright points. But through telescopes, the sky opens into nebulae, galaxies, star clusters, and light that has travelled for millions or billions of years. With instruments that observe wavelengths outside the visible range, the universe appears in other ways again. Some regions emit X-rays, some emit infrared radiation, and in some places cosmic dust hides visible light, but reveals itself in other wavelengths. Night is not only darkness. Night is a library of light, and human eyes can read only the first few lines. The world is not silent just because we cannot hear it. The universe is not empty just because our eyes do not have enough doors to see it. This can lead us to a beautiful kind of humility. In many ancient contemplative traditions, human beings were reminded that what we see should not be mistaken for the whole truth. Those traditions used the language of metaphor, meditation, dreams, veils, rivers, and shadows. Modern science uses a different language: the electromagnetic spectrum, neural signals, predictive processing, limits of attention, atomic structure, and the perception of time. These two languages are not the same, and we should not mix them carelessly. But they can meet at a very quiet point. Human beings easily mistake the part they can perceive for the whole of what exists. And the maturity of perception begins when we bow before what we do not yet know. Healthy mystery does not need to fight science. It does not need to say that everything is an illusion or that truth does not matter. On the contrary, healthy mystery can love truth even more, because it knows that truth is wider than the habits of the senses. It does not rush to fill empty spaces with superstition. It also does not close the door on wonder. It stands between two things: on one side, the precision of science; on the other, the humility of the soul. It says, measure when you can, test when you can, learn from evidence when you can, but do not forget that human tools always have limits, and what we do not know is still far greater than what we have already named. Perhaps someone standing before the ocean at night understands this intuitively. They do not need to see the entire seafloor to know the sea is deep. They do not need to hear every underwater sound to know there is life below. They only need to stand still, look at a few streaks of light on the waves, and feel that what is in front of them is larger than their eyes. When a cold wind passes through, they may feel their body become smaller, not in a meaningless way, but in a way that places them in the right proportion. Human beings are not the center of every layer of reality. Human beings are sensing creatures, learning creatures, interpreting creatures, and sometimes creatures capable of being amazed by their own limits. In everyday life, this humility can help us live more lightly. If we know we only see a part, we do not need to win every argument. If we know emotion can change the color of reality, we are less quick to believe that fear is telling the whole truth. If we know attention makes whatever we notice feel larger, we can gently turn attention toward what nourishes us. If we know memory is reconstructed, we can open ourselves to the possibility that an old story may still have another meaning. If we know time inside the mind can stretch and contract, we can remind ourselves during a sleepless night that this feeling of endlessness is not destiny. If we know dreams can create a world we believe in, we can ask ourselves in waking life, what am I believing because it is true, and what am I believing because the mind has been telling that story for too long? Some people fear that if subjective reality is not exactly the same as outside reality, then everything becomes unstable, but perhaps we do not need to be afraid in that way. A map is not the city, but the map is still useful. A model is not the whole world, but the model still helps us live. The issue is not whether we have a model. We cannot live without one. The issue is whether we know it is a model. When we know, we can use it without being imprisoned by it. We still watch the road as we walk. We still trust our senses when needed. We still respond to real danger. But we also keep a soft space inside. There may be something I have not seen yet. My understanding may not be complete. Reality may be wider than the first story. That soft space is precious. It is where compassion can enter. When someone reacts differently from us, we can remember that they are living inside a model created by their own history, senses, and emotions. When we ourselves react strongly, we can remember that there is a nervous system inside us trying to protect us with old maps. When life does not unfold the way we predicted, we can remember that the model needs updating, not that we ourselves have failed. Reality is not always against us. Sometimes it is simply wider than what we were prepared to see. And here, mystery becomes very light, very close to the breath. Not the mystery of a strange sound in the dark, but the mystery of a red flower being created by the brain from light. Not the mystery of a distant world, but the mystery of hearing rain like a lullaby, even though outside it is only drops of water striking the roof. Not the mystery of denying matter, but the mystery of matter when it's seen deeply enough that it no longer resembles a simple solid block. Not the mystery of escaping the body, but the mystery of the body itself creating the feeling of I am here, from heartbeat, breath, skin, memory, and the stream of consciousness. We can live our whole lives inside one version of reality and rarely notice that it is a version. We wake up, see the bedroom, recognize ourselves, move through the day, answer messages, work, eat, remember, expect, worry, and dream. Everything feels direct. But behind every moment is an enormous process of translation. Light is translated into images. Sound waves are translated into speech. Body signals are translated into sensation. Memory is translated into story. Emotion is translated into the color of the day. Belief is translated into conclusions about ourselves and other people. And from all of these translations, we call it my life. Seen this way, life is both fragile and sacred. A gentle sentence can change the color of someone's entire evening. A safe experience repeated many times can help the brain relearn the world. A moment of attention to the breath can pull the mind out of a spiral of anxiety. A new understanding of the past can make a memory less sharp. A humble way of seeing can save us from turning our limited perception into a sentence against someone else. We do not only live in reality, we are constantly taking part in how reality is experienced. And that places a very light but very deep responsibility in our hands. We cannot control the whole world. We cannot widen our eyes enough to see every wavelength. We cannot make our ears hear every sound. We cannot force the brain to stop predicting. We cannot erase memory, emotion, and belief completely. But we can learn to observe. We can know that the first feeling may not be the whole picture. We can slow down before concluding. We can look for more information. We can ask another person instead of only listening to the echo inside. We can let a hard day be a hard day without turning it into the definition of an entire life. We can let a fear be a signal without turning it into a prison. When the night becomes quieter, imagine reality as a deep ocean. Your consciousness is moonlight on the surface. It is beautiful, real, and valuable, but it is not the whole sea. Beneath it, there are layers of movement, currents, creatures, pressures, sounds, and dark regions. In the same way, what you're feeling right now is also real, but it may be only the surface layer of something deeper. Beneath sadness, there may be a need for rest. Beneath anger, there may be pain that has not been heard. Beneath peace, there may be the feeling of the body finally becoming safe. Beneath a belief, there may be a very old story. We do not need to dive into all of it in one night. Just knowing that the surface is not the whole ocean can already make the heart begin to widen. Modern science gives us language to understand that vastness. It tells us that human eyes see only a small part of light. It tells us that human ears turn sound waves into electrical signals for the brain to understand. It tells us that the brain predicts and interprets. It tells us that matter has a structure deeper than the everyday feeling of solidity. It tells us that the ocean, the universe, the body and the mind all have layers that direct senses cannot grasp on their own. But inner silence has its own language too. It says, be humble, slow down. Remember that what you see is not always everything. Live like someone learning to see, not like someone who has already finished seeing. Perhaps in the end, the frightening thing is not that reality is larger than we thought. The more frightening thing is to live an entire life without knowing that we are holding only a small piece and calling it the whole. Once we know, we can become lighter. We can stand before the world as we stand before the ocean at night, trusting the surface we see while respecting the depth we do not see. We can trust our experience without making it absolute. We can listen to emotion without letting it speak for every truth. We can use science to understand more clearly, use contemplation to become softer, and use compassion to remember that every human being is living inside a private translation of the world. So after all these layers of light, memory, attention, dreams, and belief, we do not need to fear that reality is fake. Perhaps we only need to gently understand that reality is deeper, wider, and quieter than what the eyes can bring back. The world is still there, but we meet it through this body, this brain, this past, this attention, this heart. And if each day we can remember that what we are seeing has never been everything, perhaps we will live more slowly, more kindly, with less judgment, and with a deeper bow before the gentle mystery of existence itself. So we have moved through a very quiet journey, but also a very deep one, to touch a question that seems simple at first. Why might reality not be the same as what you see? And perhaps, after all of this, the most important thing is not to doubt everything around us, but to learn how to look at the world with a gentler kind of humility. Because your eyes are not a perfect camera. They do not bring the entire universe inside you. They only receive a very small part of light, then send those signals to the brain. And from those fragile signals, the brain quietly creates colour, shape, depth, faces, rooms, roads, the sky, and even the feeling that this world is appearing before your eyes in a solid and certain way. You have also seen that the brain does not simply record the world. It predicts, chooses, fills in the gaps, corrects what is unclear, and builds a model of reality stable enough for you to live, move, love, avoid danger, and find your way back home. That model is a gift, but it is also a veil, because many times, what we believe to be reality may simply be the way the brain is understanding reality in that moment. A small sound in the night may be the wind outside the window, but it can also become an invisible figure if memory and fear step in together. A short sentence may only be agreement, but inside an anxious heart it can become much colder than its original meaning. You have passed through the narrow doorway of attention and seen that we do not live inside the whole world all at once. We live inside the part of the world the mind chooses to keep. What we pay attention to becomes larger, clearer, and seemingly more real. What we ignore may still exist, but it is almost absent from our experience. Then you also move through deeper layers: memory, emotion, and belief. They do not stand outside reality. They enter the way we see, the way we hear, the way we understand others, and the way we understand ourselves. A grey sky can be sadness, but it can also be peace. A silence can be rest, but it can also be the fear of being abandoned. The outside world offers the first signal, but the mind gives it the final colour. And then, in the deepest parts of the journey, you saw that time, the self, and dreams are not as solid as we think. 1 minute can feel as long as an afternoon when we are waiting in anxiety. 1 hour can pass as lightly as a breath when we are deeply focused on something we love. In dreams, the mind can weave a city that has never existed, a face we have never met, a fear that is not real outside us, and yet the emotion inside you can still feel strangely real. That does not make waking life less valuable. It only reminds us that the mind can create experiences more powerfully than we once imagined. Maybe the world is still there, quiet and vast. But each of us is living inside a private translation of that world, a translation written with light, sound, memory, emotion, belief, attention, dreams, and the very deep silences inside the mind. Reality is not necessarily fake. Perhaps it is simply much larger than the part we can see. And when we understand that, we may become less quick to judge, less insistent that the way we see things is the whole truth, and less likely to hurt ourselves with stories that are too sharp, placed by the mind onto a moment that is still unclear. Now, as this journey slowly comes to a close, you do not need to find every answer. You do not need to understand every deep layer of the brain, the universe, the senses, or consciousness in a single night. Just remember one very gentle thing. What you're seeing may be part of the truth, but it has never been all of it. And because it has never been all of it, life still has room for tenderness, for new understanding, for forgiveness, for peace, and for tomorrows that can be seen through eyes wider than yesterday's. Let your body rest. Let your shoulders soften. Let your breathing slow down like a small wave returning to the sand. Out there, the world is still continuing in its mysterious way. Light is still traveling through space. The stars are still quietly burning in the darkness. The ocean is still moving beneath its surface, and inside you the mind can also let go, without needing to build too many more stories, without needing to hold on to every thought tonight. Thank you for staying with Drift into Quiet, knowing until the very end of this journey. I wish you a sleep that is truly good, truly deep, and truly peaceful. May you gently smile as your eyes close at this quiet secret. Reality is wider than what we see, but even in this small moment, your rest is also a gentle part of that reality. I will meet you again on another night, where we will continue listening to the quiet secrets of science, the mind, and the universe.